And I've been so excited about this. And you gotta know, it's just a little intimidating. I mean, Heather and I, we get to ask him the questions you sent us in. And I've got like 30 some pages of questions. They were really, really good. So be praying for him, because I want clear, concise, verbal precision, honesty. So Bill, I'm gonna dive right in and I'm just gonna go after you. It says this: you started Willow when you were 22. And you would talk about family matters in the mid-70s, but now, in 2018, here we are again talking about family matters. What have you seen change about families over these last 4 decades?
So certainly the pace of life was way, way different in the mid-70s compared, in my view, to the pace of life in 2018. It's probably 3x faster, it seems to me. There were fewer divorces as a percentage of the population. In fact, I checked this last night, and the divorce rate was 20% in the mid-70s. It's almost 50% now. And so there were fewer blended families and, fewer heartbreaks associated with divorce. A few more kids in each family than tend to exist here today. And probably the biggest change would be there was no social media in that day. There were telephones, I must remind you, but we didn't use them very much. Social media has changed the game, as you know, so a lot of differences.
So I've loved going through these questions. You all sent in some really great ones. So you have done hundreds and hundreds of weddings over your tenure here at Willow. Someone wants to know what your success rate is. How many of those couples are still together?
As if that depends on me, right? It's true, in the early days I did 3 weddings a weekend because I was the only one qualified to be able to do weddings around here. And that was a joy. No, it wasn't. I hate doing weddings. But anyway, I've been cured for life. But I used to stand there with a bridegroom next to me, and then the back doors of whatever venue we were in would open, and then this lovely bride would be walked down by her father. Everybody in the place was absolutely sure that that union was going to last forever. They were madly in love. There's no way that that union was going to break up. And yet, statistically today, 48 to 50% of everyone who gets married will wind up in a divorce. So I've had to navigate over the years the joy that some people I've married have experienced as they've stayed together, built a strong marriage, worked hard on their relationship, had kids, and started a family and so. And I've had to navigate and walk with people through the heartbreak of divorce. Can I talk about that for just a second? All right. I want to clear something up about divorce. Malachi 2:16 gets quoted a lot. God hates divorce. What people who go through divorce start to think is God hates them. That's not what that verse means. It means God hates the heartbreak associated with divorce. He hates what it does to people. He hates when promises get broken, covenants get torn apart. He hates the potential negative effect it can have on kids and so. But he loves those who have to, sometimes through no wrong on their own part, wind up going through a divorce. I'm working with a friend right now, wants to stay married in the worst way. His wife wants out, and he can't control that. Every story of a divorce is a one-off. And what I had always hoped that we could create a community of people here at Willow that would cheer everybody on who gets married and offer all kinds of growth opportunities to get better in your marriages, and that we would be a community that would wrap its arms around those who go through the heartbreak and tragedy of divorce. And say, look, no one wanted to go through that. No one planned that on their wedding day. How can we help? How can we get you over the bitterness that often comes with a tough divorce? And how can we help you move on with your life? Because God has a better story for your future. So that's been the kind of community I hope we would be.
Now, when it comes to singles, you throw out those numbers, 48 and 50% people getting divorced. Some of my single friends have said, I don't want to go through that pain, so I'm not even going to try and date. And then other of my single friends want to be married, and they're in a place, whether through a divorce, whether never been married, or whether being a widow, just are by themselves. What advice would you give to those two groups of singles?
Yeah, so, I have friends too who are not getting married and they feel like they've dodged a bullet. You know, they're like, but statistically, when you look at the profile psychologically, it's in the 90% of people who actually express the desire to be married. That's near innate, okay? Then you have a percentage of people who try the dating scene, they try very hard, computer dating and all that. They just can't match up, with someone that they want to make a lifelong commitment to. And then there are other people, and the Apostle Paul one time, if you want to read 1 Corinthians 7, the Apostle Paul said, hey, some of you who are really serious about building the kingdom of God, why don't you make a choice not to get married so that you don't have the distraction of spouse and children, so that you can give yourself fully to being a kingdom builder. Now, we don't even preach about that. I've never heard you preach on that verse. But, there were some options along those lines that biblical writers used to mention in the text. So here's what I like to remind my single friends. If it's in your heart to want to be married, you got to get out there and date. Henry Cloud says you got to get your numbers up. You have to date enough to learn who you might want to be with and who are the kinds of people you don't want to be with. Get your numbers up. And those of you who are striking out, even though you're trying to get your numbers up, lean into biblical community. Lean in to the ministries of this church. Get on a serving team. Join a section. Get into a small group. Because the church can become like a family. And we have thousands of singles in this church that feel like this church, or part of it, is actually as close as a family. They call each other brothers and sisters, and they've integrated into each other's lives. The one thing that probably doesn't work so well is to mope around because you're single. That's not attractive to anybody. So, trust God for it, get your numbers up, lean into community, trust God, see what happens.
We have another single person who wrote in and said, doesn't everyone live together before marriage these days? Is that okay now? What's your perspective on that?
Well, I hope not everybody lives together before they're married. So here's God's perspective. Here's the biblical perspective on that, if we can just be frank. It says that sexual relations should only happen between a man and a wife in a lifelong committed relationship. So if people are moving in and having sexual relations before they're married, that's not plan A. That's outside of God's wisdom for our behavior. But I do realize that this is becoming obviously more common in the culture. And I've done some reading on this, and if a couple moves in, sets up house, has sexual relations before they're married, there's as much as a 28 to 30% increased likelihood that they're going to get divorced. This is hotly debated. Why the increased likelihood of divorce is attendant to living with each other before you get married. The leading theory, as I understand it, is that when you decide to move in with each other and you still haven't made the commitment to be married, you've set up shop, sometimes you commingle money, you've got furniture and this kind of stuff, and then you hit a speed bump in the relationship, all right? Well, now you say, should we deal with the speed bump? Should we take a break? Sometimes relationships do better if you take a break. You can't take a break because you're already moved in with each other. Someone's going to have to get a hotel room or sleep in the parents' basement. And so you go, all right, we're not going to deal with the speed bump because it would just require too much upset in our living arrangement. And so you just keep going at a snail's pace, and some relationships don't get fundamental parts fixed because of that. Here's another dynamic that you have to be very careful about. Often, when there's a live-in situation, it's because one of the two parties is not ready for the commitment of marriage, but the other one is. Okay? That variant wears on somebody. So one person is saying, are you ready yet? Are you ready yet? And the other one has the power position. No, I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. Well, that's not real healthy for a relationship. You're better off living in different quarters until you're both ready, until you make that commitment, deal with your relational stuff, then get engaged, then get married, then move in. That's kind of the biblical pattern.
We had many questions come in around that. Yeah.
That's everyone over 55 right there.
We had many questions around the LGBTQ issue. Someone sent in this quote that I thought was fascinating, that when children come out of the closet, parents often go into the closet. What support do you think we should offer for parents whose children come out as LGBTQ?
So I think the Willow congregation as a whole would be surprised how often parents call me and they want to meet with me, or they stop me after a service and they look like they've seen a ghost and they say, this unbelievable thing happened. Our 17-year-old daughter, our 18-year-old son said they were gay. And right then, just immediately right then, as a pastor, I have to decide how to serve and minister to that family. I've got a lot of options. And the one that I have chosen over the years is to bring immediate comfort, saying, hey, listen, nobody died here. This is not the end of your life, your family's story. Just take a deep breath. Nobody died, right? Could have been a traffic accident. That didn't happen. Your son, your daughter, did a very courageous thing. They came out and told you about their gender preference. Now we're going to have to deal with this, you see. Now, when we had the Ask Bill conversation, it wasn't Grill Bill a year and a half ago. It's just a friendly conversation, Ask Bill. And now we're trying to skewer him, you know. Next time it's going to be Kill Bill. But anyway, I have done a lot of work in the field of trying to understand homosexuality. My private conviction on this, nobody chooses to be gay. They discover they are. When they discover they are, most gays that I know try desperately to become straight. They pray that they would become straight. They go to conferences, they read books, they do anything to try to become straight because it's going to be a tough road. And they're going to have to tell their parents and all this. So they don't choose it, they discover it. Then they try to become straight and they can't. Then they fall into a deep depression, realizing they're never going to be able to change this. And this is where the suicide rate goes through the roof. You know these stats. Last night, standing right in the aisle over there, and a woman came, she was crying her eyes out, and she said, I have a family member who went right through the little outline that you said, discovered she was gay, tried to change and couldn't, fell into despondency and took her life. This is a very common pathway, you see. Unless parents and the Christian community can come around individuals who are discovering they're gay and convince them this is not the end of your life, that you can have a life with God at the center of it, even though you're gay. And you can have a story in front of you that's redemptive and joyful and so. Now, you all know our church believes that marriage is between a woman and a man. You know that. So that's our theological position. That's never changed in 40 years. I don't see it changing. However, we have to get better at helping families who are getting these surprises and don't know what to do. So these guys, I'm very proud of what these guys did over the course of the last year. They put a parent group together so that when kids come out and Willow parents don't know where to go and what to do about it, they've assembled a gathering where parents can come together under trained counselors and talk about this over an 8-week period of time. And the first one of those that we ran was absolutely transformational. Parents felt supported and felt like they didn't have to hide. And again, last night, another woman stopped me and she said, I just learned that one of my children is gay. I heard through the grapevine that you have this parent group, this gathering where parents can help each other with this. When's the next one starting up? I was able to tell her it's starting up January 31st. So as a church, we know what our conviction is, and we also have to raise our conviction level to serve families who are going through this challenge. Agreed? That's where we stand on it. So,
Bill, there are several hot topics around family.
Hotter than that?
It's along those lines, but what is our church's view on same-sex marriage? What is our church's view on abortion? As we receive these questions, there are some people who say, we talk about those issues way too much. There are others who say, you are silent on those issues. How do you navigate the tension between how often to talk about those topics?
Yeah, that's a tough one. If you read my email, there's some of you who are nice to me over email. Thank you, both of you. I appreciate that. You know, every time either of you write, I appreciate it. But we have a passionate congregation. And when you have 25,000 people in a congregation and thousands of them are passionate about various values, causes, issues, you know, I get a ton of negative email. You know, you haven't talked about sex trafficking in 9 weeks. You haven't talked about, you know, this, that, or the other thing in 16 weeks, and I'm counting. Now, last week, for example, it was a federal holiday, right? Martin Luther King weekend. As a church, we decided over a decade ago on Martin Luther King weekend, we were going to talk about radical inclusivity, racial reconciliation. We were going to hold that up. So I gave a message on the life and legacy of Dr. King. And I got a bunch of emails saying, you're always talking about racial reconciliation. I get so tired of you talking about racial reconciliation. I'm going, actually only a couple times a year, and it's not out of bounds, is it, to talk about it on MLK weekend? All I'm saying is that I love the fact that we have fired up people who care about the poor, who care about prisoners, who care about abortion, who care about all these issues. I love the fact that we have a fired up congregation. I love the fact that you challenge me to speak more on these things. I'm kidding about, it doesn't break my heart. I go note to self, maybe it has been too long. But it's hard to raise up 20 values, you know, at just the right expected rhythm over the course of a year. So in our sermon planning, you know, Steve and I will sit down and we'll say, hey, it's been a while since we've talked about this, that, or the other thing. And I'll say, well, I did last time, you're up this time. Or he'll say, I think we need your voice on it. So, but it's difficult. And you should feel sorry for me.
We got this question. I loved it. I'm the parent of 4 beautiful, incredible kids, all of whom are wired so uniquely. What advice would you give in how to best parent/discipline kids in a way that is consistent and fair, but also appropriate to the personalities of each child?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. One of the shocks to me, Len and I had 2 children, Shauna and Todd. And Shauna was a handful and rebellious and pushed all the limits and so. And Todd was quite dutiful and compliant. And so sometimes we'd have to give, you know, Shauna a little spanking or a long time out. Sometimes Todd would cry when we gave Shauna a time out. I'm like, dude, she deserved it. She ought to be in jail for what she just did. But you know, Todd was really sensitive. And Shauna during those days was, quite rebellious. And we learned very early on, we were going to have to coach each child in a very different way. Shauna didn't have an unexpressed thought. And Todd, you had to be with him for an hour before he would even want to mention anything. I would have to do projects with him, build model cars with him, take him to used car lots. He used to like to look at cars and used car lots. And so I'd go walking through used car lots, and then on the way home, he'd say, "Hey, Dad, I've been thinking about something." I'm like, "It took me an hour and a half," you know. And then get home, and Sean is, "I got 5 things I want to tell you, Dad." So we really, one of the tricks to parenting is to celebrate the uniqueness of each child. Identify it and celebrate it. Coach into it. Love that kid a little differently. Cheer on that kid a little differently, because they're all different. And the sooner that you can affirm the uniqueness of each kid and parent them differently, the better. Any parent who just goes, "I line them up and treat them all the same way," those kids are going to wind up with a total different opinion of you when they're adults, because you treat them all the same way. That's going to line up good with a couple of them, and a couple of them you're going to break their spirit or break their heart. So you have to be, each one of these kids is an individual treasure that has to be dealt with individually.
Someone wrote in that they remember you stating that you actually weren't very excited about becoming a grandparent. We obviously all know that isn't true today. What changed?
Well, it's true. There are a lot of men my age who would, stop me after services, and they always wanted to show me pictures of their perfect grandkid. And they'd show me a picture, and I'm like, "Kid's ugly." That perfect grandkid. I'm like, wow, And so after you get several hundred of these people going, "Look at my perfect grandkid," I just said to myself, I'm not sure I want any, and I'm not going to have pictures of them and show them around, you see. And then Shauna had Henry, and then eventually Mac, and I did have quite a different experience, and I haven't taken a lot of time reflecting on this, but early on, like the first day in the hospital, when, I've only had one daughter, and that's Shauna, and we've had an unbelievable connection. Same with Todd, but we've had a father-daughter thing that's really, really close. And when I saw the way Shauna loved Henry when he was only hours old, I just said, I'm going to love whoever Shauna loves. I saw the love pouring out of her, and I said, well, then, if you love that little guy, I'm going to love that little guy. And, the first year, they don't talk. They just make trouble. They're a little boring the first year. But then when you can start talking to them and hanging out with them and building relationships with them, I'm really engaged. I have a couple other thoughts on this, if I may. I think engaged grandparents can really help a young family. First of all, you provide backup for them. Both Shauna and Aaron were sick over this past weekend, just the last couple of days. Lynn's in Michigan because she has a relative who's dying. And so I took the boys yesterday, pretty much all morning. They tore the house apart. It was unbelievable. But when I brought them back, then Shauna and Aaron were like, "Man, we were sick and you helped us. Thank you. And I'm like, "Where's the other grandparents?" No, just kidding. Just kidding. All in good, Actually, they were supposed to go to the other side, but the other grandparents were sick, so I was the only healthy one around. Second thing is, sometimes, like Sean and Aaron will come and they'll actually ask for counsel or coaching. They'll say, "What did you do when, your kids were this age? Do you think we're getting this right or not?" And I think just emotional support, prayer support. Like right now, Henry and Mac, they know that Shauna and Aaron love God. They know that. But it's reinforcing when they go to the grandparents' house and they realize that Dan and Diane Nikus really love God too, and Bill and Lynn Hybels do too. It reinforces the family heritage of faith. And when you have that and you're kind of, ganging up on these little kids, and saying, we're going to try to impress this faith into you. We're all going to do it together.
We had someone who wrote in and said, what does a grandparent do if they don't agree with the way their kids are parenting? How do they handle that?
You keep your mouth shut. Unless it's something, that's all the young folks clapping right here. There can be a lot of hurt feelings because, when grandparents are always are bringing correction or in ways that are different from the way that the actual parents are raising the kids, that's a real, that's incendiary territory right there. So every once in a while, we'll have a conversation and just say, we're wondering why this or why that. And we're happy with it, whatever the answer is, but they're their kids. And we try to give them quite a bit of independence, and we think they're doing a great job. So.
Bill, how do you discuss, process, or accept differences of opinion with Lynn about big subjects, specifically those involving faith, scripture, or calling? Like how do marriages do that, wrestle over differences of opinion?
Yeah, believe it or not, and this will be hard for some to believe, on the big issues of life, spirituality, money, how we raise our kids, ministry, those big issues, Lynn and I have never really had big disagreements. And I'm saying that, we have lots of other disagreements. But on the big ones, we have not had major disagreements. And for those of you who are dating and you're wondering, who to make a lifelong commitment to, identify what those really big ones are. And I think it's God, it's money, it's are you going to have kids, it's how are you going to raise them, it's how are you going to choose your profession and these kinds of things. But what I've tried to do, and I think, if Lynn and I have gotten anything right, we've tried to be each other's biggest cheerleaders in the causes and the callings that God has put on our lives. So Lynn's a peacemaker in the Middle East. She goes to the Congo. She tends to get involved in thorny problems in tough places around the world. Well, I cheer her on in that. I don't understand why God gave her that calling, but she feels he did. So and then when she waves goodbye to me, if I'm doing global summits around the world, she just goes, I know God's called you to do that, and I'm supportive of it. So if it's over a big one, so I'm saying we kind of lucked out in that department. If we did have a major disagreement over one of those major things, before we damaged the relationship, I would probably go to a Christian counselor. I'm a firm believer that if you're at loggerheads and you stay there long enough, you could do permanent damage to a marriage. And you've heard me say this over the years. If you're butting heads, get help soon. It only takes like the second headbutt, and now you're sleeping with your backs turned to each other. It gets quiet around the house. The kids can see this is not good. And engage a Christian counselor and have them coach you through how you can bring this to some kind of resolution.
Can I do a follow-up to that question? I feel like a lot of marriages and a lot of people who are in dating relationships, one of the big things is around both people having callings. One of the things that I've respected about you and Lynn is you have made space. But it feels like most marriages, one person has the primary calling and the other person's calling has to be kind of stuffed or silenced. How do you make space for both?
You're describing a very common phenomenon, and I think it's really dangerous for either party in a marriage to sublimate the calling of God on their life. Because what usually happens is you say, okay, I will not pursue my calling now, and I'll get behind yours, okay? 9 out of 10 times, resentment is going to kick in. And you won't tell it at first, but a year will go by, then another year, and pretty soon you realize this marriage isn't going so well anymore. And you realize, oh, wait a minute, what's at the root of it? And it goes all the way back to when you agreed that I would support you, and you never really tried to encourage me to do what God wanted me to do. So I think I would much rather deal with the complexity of juggling twin calling marriages, than deal with the potential resentment that builds if one has to just suck down the fact that I don't get to do what God called me to do. And you often tell yourself, I will get the joy by just supporting the other person. You may have some joy in that, but there's something that starts to ache inside of you to feel the thrill of God using your life, like you watch your partner feeling the thrill of God using him or her. So I would say we got to talk about it. We got to make compromises. We have to both be able to fulfill our callings.
Excellent. Hey, let's jump into some rapid fire questions. How's that sound? Are you game?
I don't know what it is.
Okay, so rapid fire. Quick answers on these, okay?
I do long, slow answers to fill up the time.
You and Lynn have been married almost 45 years now. What's been your favorite decade of marriage so far?
Well, it wasn't the first decade. She reminded me of this over the Christmas holiday. She told the kids about this. I think they had heard about it before, but shortly before we were going to get married, Lynn comes from a very close-knit family, deeply connected. She has one brother, parents, and whenever I would go over to pick Lynn up on a date, instead of, I just wanted to honk the horn, have her run out, and us take off. No. Her parents wanted me to come in and not just like sit down, but sit down and talk for a long period of time. And I'm going, I wanted to date your daughter. I don't want to sit here in this living room. So at one point, after this got a little out of hand and they wanted me to keep talking, I finally said to her dad, I'm like 19. I said, hey, Bob, I don't look at this whole thing as a package deal. I just mainly want to date your daughter, okay? Now, that cost me the first decade of our marriage. 10 years to dig out of that hole, okay? Don't use that line, okay? Make something else up, but don't use that line. And in actuality, I would say Lynn and I are actually in our best decade right now. We enjoy the causes God has called us to. We enjoy the grandkids so much. We enjoy the little cottage over in South Haven where we get to be normal people and not public people. And so I would say our current decade would be the best one.
All right, second question. Which child was easier to raise?
They were both equally easy to raise.
Okay, your family's favorite spiritual practice?
Probably what we do on December 31st every year, New Year's Eve. We do our top 10 blessings, and we spend time on our vacation. We do this very deliberately. It takes a long time, and we'll sit around sometimes for 2 or 3 hours, and everyone will go around and do their top 10 blessings. And this year, both Henry and Mac participated. Max were pretty lame, but, he did his best. But it's a cherished family tradition that gets us all on the same page, and we have a lot to be thankful for.
All right, we're in church, so don't lie. Grandson's favorite football team?
Well, he's been brainwashed by Uncle Steve Carter, so it would be University of Michigan. It hurts me to say that.
Yes.
If you could have your kids and grandkids memorize one Bible verse, what would it be?
Wow.
We stumped him.
Yeah, I know, that's good. My son, what I most want my kids to understand, my grandkids, is the gospel. And the single verse that made the gospel clear to me was Titus 3:5, not by works of righteousness which we have done, but according to God's mercy, he saved us through what Christ did, you see. And now I'm probably going to have to make them memorize that. So
I love this question that came in. My parents are approaching 80. How do we best honor them as they need more and more help, yet rarely ask for it? The parent/child relationships are changing rapidly, and we are in uncharted waters navigating tough decisions. What advice would you offer?
Yeah, I think this is a reality of hundreds of us, roughly in my generation right now. You know, our kids are raised, we're also enthusiastically engaging with grandkids, and we're saying goodbye to parents who, in many cases, some pass quickly and some pass very slowly over a very long period of time. The scriptures are clear on this when it says we need to honor our mothers and fathers. We need to honor them. And high-functioning families divvy up the responsibilities of what is the honorable thing to do to see mom and dad into the next reality. Now, my dad died suddenly at 52. No one even got to say goodbye. So that happened that way. My mom got cancer later on in life and then died over about a 12-month period of time, I think. And we all changed our schedules to be with her when we knew she was going to pass. Where it gets difficult is when people go into dementia and then have long-term illnesses and then nursing homes and hospice and all of that. General rule, though, is you would want your kids to be there for you if you were in the bed, and we need to be the kinds of sons and daughters that are there for our parents to honor them appropriately. So figure it out with your siblings and do the right thing by your parents.
So good. We have someone who wrote in and asked.
That was everyone over 75 right there.
We had someone who asked about instilling a love of Scripture into the younger generation. How do you help the younger generation love the Bible?
Yeah, I am very concerned about this. Statistically, young kids are on screens 6 hours a day. That's not a lie, that's a stat, okay? And it's not that what they're putting in their heads is terrible. Sometimes my grandkids will show me something that they're watching, and I'll say, well, let me take a look at that. And then I get all engrossed in it. They go, give it back, Papa. And I'm like, no, I kind of like this, you know? I mean, some content on screens these days animation is unbelievable. The storylines, the plot lines are just incredible. The problem is that the quantity of entertainment that comes on screens these days is sucking up most of the brain space of these kids. And scripture, Christian thoughts, Christian music can barely find a place in there anymore. So I keep advising young parents, you got to put boundaries around screen time. You know, it's not all bad, but there's got to be boundaries. And you have to do the math and say, if they're getting X hours a day of stuff that is from the entertainment industry, how much time should we be trying to get God's word, God's truth, and good Christian music into their heads and hearts? And, you know, one thing that I did with my kids, I do with my grandkids now, is if I am taking either of my grandsons for a walk, I'll say, look at the sky that God created. Look at the sunset that God's designed for our joy on a night like I take every opportunity to draw their attention to God in every way. I pray with them in restaurants before meals. And when I have the chance to put them to bed, long spiritual conversations, I read the Bible to them, pray with them. And so, but it's a challenge. And we just had a meeting, you were both in it a couple days ago, about parents getting, you've heard my riff on this, so I don't want to end on a bad note, but the attendance regularity of kids in Promised Land is still a challenge. And we saw the recent stats of how few of our kids come 4 weeks a month, and how many I mean, staggering amounts of our kids come one Sunday a month. And I keep saying, parents, you got to do better. These kids can't call Uber. They need a ride here. And so please do your best to get them in Promised Land. These guys have that new rally cry for 2018. We're going to fight for every Willow family. Well, I'm proud of them for wanting to do this. And they both have young children, and they're in that fight. So they're going to lead that fight with a lot more passion than an old guy like me. But surround them with prayer. We've got new programs and new content coming your way to do everything we can to support you as you're raising kids and grandkids.
Great, excellent. Well, we are at the point of about needing to wrap up. But before I ask the last question, Bill has done an incredible job, hasn't he? Great answers, Bill. Thank you. Bill, when you think of the next 20 years of Willow, what do you want to be true of Willow families?
Well, one of the things I'm sort of grieving in this recent era of Willow is we've had some terrific families go through some very difficult family storms, and that's saddened me. And then when you guys came up with that idea, we're going to fight harder. We're going to provide more resources and content and training opportunities to make families of Willow stronger. I resonated with that. So my hope would be 20 years from now, there'd be a whole new generation of Willow Creekers with incredibly strong Christ-centered families. You know, when you get to the end of your life, I mean the very end, okay? What you have in the bank isn't going to turn your crank at that point. Trophies and achievements, plaques on walls where you were with important people and all that, that's going to feel pretty hollow to you. It's who's standing around that bed. It's your ultimate small group. That's what your family is. They're your ultimate small group. And it's going to be, did you build Christ into them? Are they loving people? And have they brought Christ to the next generation and the next generation? And I hope during your guys, 20-year run, I hope it's longer than that, you will have enormous success in building the strongest, most vibrant, Christ-honoring families this church has ever known.
Well, Bill, thank you just for the ways that you've coached, mentored us, the way that you have pastored this congregation for 40 plus years. We respect you, admire you, we love you. Thank you so much. And can we thank Bill one more time? As you do that, can you stand to your feet? I just want to tell you one thing. I love even just looking out across this room, where the diversity of age and wisdom, singles, married, grandparents, you're all welcome here. We need every one of you. And I challenge for you is, would you think about, maybe it's on the drive home, one thing that you heard. Maybe it's about the screen time. Maybe it's about being with a loved one. But would you just grab hold of one nugget of truth that God has given Bill to share with us this morning? And would you just go, man, I gotta apply this to my life. This Wednesday night at midweek, we're gonna continue our series walking through some letters that are found in the book of Revelation. Pastor Eugene Cho will be with us. It's gonna be an amazing night, so join us for that. And then next weekend, we're gonna continue the Reset series. And I'm gonna give you 4 keys, 4 essential keys to having a vibrant, healthy marriage. So please join us for that. Would you put your hands out? I'd love to give you a blessing. My brothers and sisters of Willow Creek Community Church, may we be a family. No matter where we are, what stage of life that we are in, may we live knowing the reckless love of God is true. And may we continue to grow closer to Christ this week and closer to the people that He's surrounded us with. I hope you have a great, great week. We'll see you next weekend. Grace and peace.